I'm Grandmaster Grigory Kaidanov with the third and final part on the video about C3 Sicilian, or as it widely called, a Lapin variation. In part 2, we finished looking at variation with bishop to g4. We looked at bishop g4 move here, and now it's time to look at another popular variation when black plays e6 right away, leaving this bishop on c8. As you recall, after bishop g4, white always plays bishop b2, which is natural. You try to break the pawn. However, when black plays e6, there is no point of putting bishop on e2. You can put it on much better square d3. Black usually plays something like bishop e7, castles, castles, and now we are going to follow a game between Romanian Grandmaster Vaida and Russian Grandmaster Tunik, in which white played bishop to e3. I would like to point out that when you study certain opening, it's always good to find a grandmaster who plays this opening on a regular basis. And a lot of times you can study games of these grandmasters and see the ideas behind the opening very clearly just based on his games. Because usually a grandmaster who plays a particular opening does a lot of work on it, and so his games are very instructive. This grandmaster, Romanian Grandmaster Vaida, VAJDA, I think is a big expert in C3 Sicilian. He maybe is not as high-profile grandmaster like Sveshnikov and Tivakov, who play this as well, but I really like the way he plays this variation. So if you have a chess-based database or other companies' database, and you can look for his games, I think you can learn a lot of lines just based on his games. Okay, so his opponent took on d4 at this point. By the way, he kind of has to. For example, if black plays something like knight c6, and white plays, for example, d takes c5, and black plays bishop takes c5, white already can win a pawn in this position. He has a very good tactical shot. He can play bishop takes h7 check, which will discover the attack on the queen. It will eliminate the defender. It will trade queens, eliminate the defender of the bishop on c5, and this allows white to win a pawn. So this is one of the main reasons why black usually prefers to take on d4 at this point. As I mentioned in the previous part, bishop e3 is not exactly the best square for the bishop, e3 square. However, this is a way to force him to take on d4. So once again, we got position with isolated pawn, but this position is probably a little bit better for white compared to the bishop on g4 because of obvious reason that black bishop is kind of passive. And white played a3, typical move in this position, tried to deny black knight from getting to b4 and then d5. Black plays b6, queen e2, bishop b7, rook a d1, rook fe8, rook fe1. All those are kind of standard moves. White does have a choice. He doesn't have to arrange his pieces exactly this way. Like, for example, rook c1 and rook d1 also will be quite a good arrangement. But that's what Grandmaster Vaida did in this game. Black played queen b8. The idea of this move is to move away from this d file where queen is opposing to the rook very often. And bishop b1, typical move with the idea to put queen in front of the bishop and create some threats on this diagonal. Black played, sorry, my bad. Black didn't play rook fe8, he played rook a d8. This actually makes much more sense because in this case, when black moves queen to b8, actually he doesn't block the rook on a. And white played queen c2, black plays g6, and now another typical idea. There is no point of bishop to be on this diagonal. So now white bishop is transferred on the a2 g8 diagonal. So now d5 is one move that black has to be aware of. This is actually quite dangerous idea because then this diagonal will be open and f7 square will become vulnerable. And sometimes the sacrifices on e6 are also possible. So black plays knight d5. One of the typical ideas here is simply to take the knight, and usually white enjoys a small advantage in those positions because this bishop is kind of bad, blocked by this pawn on d5. But this is really small advantage, and in this particular game, Grandmaster Vaida preferred bishop to c1 move. Maybe this is still a possibility. For example, if black plays bishop f6, then it's definitely a good move because after pawn takes, rook takes, white probably can take the pawn on d5. Still a little bit unclear after knight takes d4. In any case, black decided not to play bishop f6, but rather take on c3. And now we go to the position with so-called hanging pawns. So this quite often happens in the position with the isolated pawn. You transpose to the position with so-called hanging pawns, but usually those positions are good for white. Bishop f6, knight g5, black played queen c7, queen d3. The idea is to transfer queen on the king's side, knight a5, queen h3, black had to take this knight, and now white has a big advantage because black's dark squares are very weak. The game featured a very elegant finish. White played bishop e5, queen f5, queen h4, knight c4, bishop f6, e5, bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. And now white finished game with an elegant combination. He played rook takes e5, rook takes e5, and completely unexpectedly d takes e5, sacrificing the queen, but at the same time threatening a checkmate. And in this position, black resigned because, I mean, there are two threats. One is rook d8 checkmate, another one is queen h6. So white won the game. This game shows how to attack in those situations when black plays e6 without developing bishop on g4. Very quickly, we can look at another game. This is a game between Ukrainian Grandmaster 𝐭𝐡𝐞 and his opponent was Gutmans. So this went through the pretty much same moves order. Black maybe just took on d4 a little bit earlier, but they arrived to similar position. This time, white didn't put his queen on e2, he put his queen on c2. So it was a little bit different setup for white, but as you'll see, ideas were very similar. Now black played this move h6, which a lot of times is a weakening move in this position. White now played queen c1. When you look at this, it seems like the only idea of queen c1 is to sacrifice on h6. But this is just one of two ideas. Another one is, like, for example, black can defend against bishop takes h6 by playing bishop f8. But now it turns out that after bishop f4, this queen doesn't have too many good squares. Queen probably has to go to e7, and it's kind of awkward square for the queen. White can play rook fe1, and this is quite unpleasant. So black decided to play knight to d5. White played bishop b1. This is already a familiar idea of trying to play queen c2 to put pressure on this diagonal. And as we already know, bishop can go to a2 as well. And now black played very anti-positional move f5. I guess it's almost like a desperation. He didn't like his position, and he tries to close this diagonal. But the drawback is it severely weakens e5 square. You can never play f6 anymore. It weakens the e6 pawn, which is also important, and it blocks the bishop, which white right away kind of demonstrated. He took on d5, and black took with the pawn. Maybe taking with the queen deserves attention. one of the ideas for white in this type of situation would be to attack this queen with a bishop, like something like bishop d3, bishop c4, followed by d5. This is one of the possible plans. Black took with a pawn, bishop f4, queen f6, rook fe1. Fantastic position for white. You can see that all white pieces are in good positions. This open e-file, the e5 square, which is a great outpost for white pieces. And white just proceeds to play very simple centralizing moves, and very quickly black's position collapsed. Queen f3. At this point, black feels probably that he already kind of losing positionally. He tries to go for tactics, knight takes d4, rook takes d4, rook e8, trying to exploit this file, but white simply, white is up a piece, so he sacrifices in exchange, and with 2 pieces for the rook, he's winning. So the game went for just 2 more moves. King h7, g4, white is exploiting this diagonal, and after bishop takes e5, bishop takes f5 check, black resign. So this concludes the coverage of d5 move. And finally, we are going to look at just 2 games which featured rare systems. In one of them, black played e6, d4, d5. I don't think you will see this system very often, but just in case, you need to know what to do. One option which you have, especially if you play advanced French, is just transpose. Play e5 and play this. This is a direct transposition to exchange French. But at the same time, if you don't play exchange French and you don't like close positions, simply check on d5. If black plays queen takes d5, we have another transposition to the system we just covered. This is a game between Vaida and Tunik, and game by Ukrainian Grandmaster 𝐭𝐡𝐞. It will be exactly the same system. Or black can play e takes d5, and we are going to follow another game by Grandmaster Vaida. This time his opponent was a strong Hungarian Grandmaster 𝐕𝐚𝐫𝐢𝐜𝐢𝐜. So Vaida played bishop e3. Now in case of c takes d4, black is going to get a bad version of isolated pawn. And I like in this position this move, which is not kind of a standard move. Usually you try to keep your bishop at the beginning of the game. But here, it's a very powerful move. After knight takes d4, queen takes d4, queen is very well placed in the center of the board. And another idea behind bishop takes d4 is after, for example, something like knight f6, you take and you either win a pawn or spoil the opponent's pawn structure. So more often black plays c4 in this position. That's what Grandmaster 𝐕𝐚𝐫𝐢𝐜𝐢𝐜 did. b3 is a typical move undermine black's pawn chain. It's well known that, for example, if black concedes b5, a4 will crush his pawn chain. He can't play a6 because after a takes b5, his rook is hanging. b5 would be possible if black bishop is already developed, but with black bishop on c8, he can't do that. So therefore, he has to check on b3. A takes b3, bishop d6, and now bishop d3 is a popular move, but in this particular game, Grandmaster Vaida decided to play g3, which is just another way of playing. Knight f6, bishop g2, castles, rook e8. And now, very important move, fight for space, c4. White puts 2 his pawns in the center, he creates a great square for the knight, he opens the diagonal for his bishop. All those factors definitely give white a good game. Black played b6, knight c3, and bishop b7. So black invites white to take on d5, which will not be good for white, because after something like knight b4, black eventually wins this pawn back, and it will be good version of isolated pawn position for black, because the square, d5 square, will be very much in black's possession. But White simply plays bishop g5, pinning the knight, putting more pressure on g5, and black has to trade. After d takes e4, even b takes e4 gives white a very good game, but Grandmaster White played this game extremely aggressively, and he continued knight d5, putting pressure on this diagonal. Black could and should have played bishop e7, after which simple knight e7, queen e7, b takes e4 gives white a nice advantage. Those two strong pawns, d5 is the next move, bishop pair, very nice advantage for white. But black decided to test white and took this pawn on b3, and now black king is open and white starts an assault on black king. Knight on the side of the board is bad. However, if it's only temporary, you know that very soon you're going to get on this wonderful square in front of two double pawns. That's fine. So black played knight b4, trying to trade some pieces, which is a common way of defending against the attack, trade some pieces. But white continues the attack, knight f5, threatening queen g4 followed by queen g7, checkmate. Black plays king to h8, and now white decided simply to win this one of the pawns back. He's still down the pawn with this bad pawn structure, with all those weak pawns and a very strong knight on f5. White has great compensation for the pawn. So pieces were exchanged on d5. Black played rook to e6. Very natural, very kind of normal move. By the way, he probably had to do this because there were two threats, f7 and d6. But now, a very nice combination. So he played knight h6, and amazingly, to protect f7 is very difficult. For example, if black plays something like queen f8, knight f7, and queen is going to be deflected from protecting a8 rook. So black had to play king to g7, knight takes f7, king takes f7, rook fe1, and once again, black is getting killed on the fact that this queen is chained to protect this rook. Like queen e8, rook takes e6, followed by queen takes e8, white is up in exchange with completely winning position. Black played bishop e5, hoping just to get maybe down maybe a pawn or get into the rook endgame, and game ended in one move. I would recommend pause the video and try to find a beautiful tactical shot which white delivered on his next move. Very, very nice shot. And the move was rook takes a7 check. Fantastic tactical shot, deflecting the rook from protecting this queen. After rook takes a7, queen d8, black loses a queen, and then otherwise white just checks the rook on a8. Black resign. And finally, we're going to look at the game which featured a rare variation. After e4, c5, c3, black might play knight c6, d4. In the part 1 of this video, we talked about how black can quickly lose after something like e6 or cd4, cd4, e6, and white continues with d5. But I mentioned that objectively the strongest move for black is d5. And here, white's best move, in my opinion, is knight c3. By the way, you can transpose. You can check on d5 and play knight f3, and it would transpose into second d5 variation. But I like knight c3 move. I think it's even stronger. It's interesting that if you look for this position in the database, most often moves order comes from Slav defense. So, for example, after d4, d5, c4, c6, takes, knight c3, knight c6, c4, and we reach exactly the same position. So, d takes c4, d5, knight e5, and now queen a4 check, typical idea, bishop d7, queen takes e4, knight g6, bishop c4. This is a game between Grandmaster 𝐤𝐢𝐜𝐢 and Carlos Martinez from 𝐭𝐡𝐞 𝐒𝐢𝐢𝐜 in 2004. So White develops his pieces very quickly. He definitely has an advantage thanks to this pawn on d5. Here, for a moment, it looks like he has to move his queen and can't castle, but he has bishop c4 move, which allows him to castle safely. e5, white castle, black plays rook d8. And here, black's problem is that his king is stuck in the center, and white keeps putting pressure on black. Black can't castle because then bishop h6 will discover the attack on the queen and the attack on the rook on f8. So black had to play rook e8, queen e2, queen b7, bishop h6. Now black can never castle. Bishop e7, rook to c4, queen b6, queen d3, rook d8. And here white to move, and it's exactly like in the previous game. There is a very nice tactical move which endgames right away. Timur Gareev played this move and black immediately resigned. And the move is rook to c8. So if rook takes c8, then queen d7 is a checkmate in one move, and white is threatening queen d7 checkmate anyway, because black rook is penned. Very nice win by Grandmaster Gareev. And this concludes the third and final part of our video about c3 Sicilian. I hope you will include this opening in your repertoire. Like I said, watching those videos is pretty much enough for you to start playing this line. You don't have to memorize a huge amount of theory. I introduced you to main ideas, and those ideas should be good enough to navigate you through all lines in c3 Sicilian. Good luck to all of you, and it was Grandmaster Grigory Kaidanov. Goodbye.